Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andre Cote. I am the Acting Research Director with the Canadian Urban Institute, and I am pleased to welcome everyone to this second event in our Main Street Action Week. As we begin, I'm going to offer a land recognition. So I am in Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuits, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. We also recognize that Toronto was covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. So I am grateful to live and work in this community, and I'm also very mindful of the history of these treaties and the essential continuing work of reconciliation that I and we all have to do. So before we get going, some housekeeping for the session. First off, we are recording the session and we'll be posting it to our website in the coming week. So for those who aren't able to make it in person today, that'll be available. The second is we encourage you to use the chat function, so you can post your thoughts, your comments as we go through the presentation into the discussion portion. You can drop in your questions as well, and I'll seek to include as many of those as we can in the discussion. I just note that you should toggle to the all panelists and attendees option, just so that everybody can see what you are posting. And as we're getting started, feel free to drop in a hello to the group. Tell us who you are, where you're from. That'd be great, just to see who the mix of folks are who are joining us today. And I do note the chat portion would be included with the recording of the webinar that will be shared. So just full disclosure on that front. So we're excited to be here today. This is an important juncture for our Bring Back Main Streets initiative. Early in the spring, the Canadian Urban Institute embarked on the Bring Back Main Streets project. Prior to COVID, there had been work around downtowns and main streets. There were many issues already impacting our main streets. Of course, as we know, the pandemic has changed things in dramatic ways, in some ways accelerated some of the challenges that main streets are facing, and obviously been super challenging for small businesses as well, which will be a big focus of our session today. Last week marked the launch of the Bring Back Main Streets, the action report, as we were calling it. So that was an important milestone. We encourage you to check that out. It's a compilation of a wide range of actions of potential policy solutions for policymakers, local business associations, and the variety of stakeholders on main streets. It was developed through CUI, but I think most importantly through this project with a really broad and terrific network of collaborators, a real coalition. So we encourage you to check that out. It also builds on a bunch of the work that's been done with our research partners, which brings us to the session today. Research partners like 360 Collective prepared solutions briefs, as well as a series of memos that help to tease out different aspects of the challenges on Main Street and start to get us towards potential solutions and actions. So for this session today, this is the second of our 4 sessions during the Bring Back Main Streets Action Week. The focus today is on small business friendly solutions for main streets. And so we know the impacts of the crisis on main streets and small businesses, particularly restaurants and local retail, have been quite well reported at this point. But I think what we wanted to do was get into what were some of the business conditions for small businesses coming into this COVID crisis. How do we understand the various types of impacts the crisis has had? And then, of course, most importantly, what are the types of policy solutions we should be considering to both sustain small businesses through the crisis, but also to support a recovery on main streets and in our cities. So today we are focusing on the solutions brief prepared by John Archer and Judy Morgan of 360 Collective. Hi, John. Hi, Judy. So they are one of CUI's great research partners on this Bring Back Main Streets initiative. 360 is a Toronto-based firm that brings together retail strategists, urban planners, market researchers to focus this mix of expertise on both traditional and non-traditional retail sectors, on communities, development, and real estate in cities. I'm sure John and Judy will have a little bit more to say about what they do. I would just say they both bring immense expertise on this topic of Main Street small business and also about what makes local economies tick. So we'll benefit greatly from having them. So they will kick things off today with a 15-minute presentation about their solutions brief. I'll drop the link to it in the chat as well in a second, just so that people can take a look. After that, we will bring in a great set of panelists to share their perspectives and to respond and reflect on 360's presentation. So I'll quickly introduce them now, and then we can have each of them introduce themselves a little bit later in the session. So first we have Dr. Alexandra Flynn from the University of British Columbia. She is at the Peter A. Allard School of Law, and her work focuses on law, governance, and the city. And so we'll let her unpack that a little bit. We have Judy Lamb from the city of Hamilton. Hi, Judy. The other Judy, Judy L, for our purposes today. So she is the lead on urban renewal and regeneration in downtown BIA and commercial corridors in Hamilton. So obviously brings a key perspective to our discussion today. We have Chris Rickett with the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation of Ontario, and also who was recently on assignment leading a team at the City of Toronto in their COVID-19 business mitigation and recovery efforts. So right at the heart of it with the City of Toronto. And last but not least, we have Antoinette Rodrigue with the Association des sociétés de développement commercial de Montréal. So they represent 20 local improvement associations in Montreal that represent 12,500 businesses. And so obviously have a great vantage point on how things are unfolding and the actions being taken in Montreal. So with that, I will turn it over to John and Judy to kick us off with the presentation. And I'll just ask that our panelists we'll all just mute ourselves and turn off our cameras just until the end of the presentation. So thank you, and over to you, John and Judy.
Thank you very much, Andre. That's great. It was our very great pleasure to be asked to write a solution brief on business-friendly policy that responds to COVID-19. It's a highlight in my career, certainly, to work with such a diverse group of talented people from across the country. It really has been quite a remarkable project. In reflecting our collaborative working style, I'm going to first turn to my colleague, John Archer, to introduce you to 360 Collective. John? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Always. Yeah, I'll echo exactly what Judy just said. And Andre, very honored to be here today to share with you some of the solution briefs that we've come through in working with the Canadian Urban Institute on their great project on Bring Back Main Streets. I think it's a good part of 6 months we've been meeting and chatting and working through different kind of think tank type issues. And so it's been great that way. Yeah, a little bit about 360. We've been working across North America, especially in main streets and small retail kind of environments, and bring our perspective in terms of what's happening here in terms of COVID response and how things are accelerating in terms of key trends across retail and main streets. We do take a very broad-based approach. Our definition of retail includes retail and food services and entertainment and recreation services, so it is very broad. And the other key aspect in terms of our work is a very holistic approach. We're definitely looking at things from the business perspective and profitability, but we also are very keenly aware of municipal economic development in terms of providing goods and services for local residents is extremely important. Ideas around city building and walkability and vitality of commercial streets is really important. And lastly, the idea about flexibility and adaptability of our main streets and our businesses so that they can continue to be the lifeblood and community assets that we have known them to be. I'm going to turn it back over to Judy, and she's going to walk you through some of the kind of key findings and solution briefs. And then, as Andre said, then we'll open up to the broader panelists and have a really, hopefully, robust conversation.
Thanks, John. So first, we wanted to give you a brief overview of the solution brief itself. The Canadian Urban Institute asked us to summarize our experience as to the impact COVID-19 was having on the underlying conditions and issues on Main Street, and to suggest policy directions that governments could pursue to support their sustainability and recovery. And the audience the solution brief is targeted at really is policymakers at all orders of government, so very broad. We were asked to address these 5 issues, and all of them are also very broad and quite complex topics. So the solution brief really skims the surface of these issues and in many respects, and but I think our goal was to provide some general guidance in areas that people can do deep drills down into. So in total, we recommended 13 policy directions, and the full solution brief URL is there for future reference. So John, next slide. We couldn't possibly cover everything in the solution brief within the 15 minutes we have with you today. So therefore, we decided to focus on policies targeted at addressing COVID-19's impact on 3 of the requirements for business success. And those are being able to keep costs in balance with revenues, having access to cash flow to cover the costs that must be paid before revenues are received, and being able to operate within an efficient regulatory framework. Next slide. So in terms of balancing costs and revenues, COVID-19 has, it's an understatement to say that COVID-19 has dramatically decreased revenues for many Main Street businesses, leaving them to cope with fixed costs. 2 major categories that we're going to talk about are rent and property tax, which have presented major affordability issues. And so those are going to be discussed in the next 2 sections of the presentation. In terms of access to cash flow, small businesses typically have quite limited cash reserves. In an April 2020 survey, for example, half of the small businesses that responded said they couldn't survive for longer than 3 months. However, conventional lenders typically consider the sector high risk, and they're even more so now that with COVID-19. So we've talked about a few policies to support business and accessing finance in section 4 of the presentation. And then the last one is that COVID-19 has added a rapidly changing layer to an already complicated regulatory framework. And policies to help businesses navigate are summarized in section 5 of the presentation. So next slide. In terms of rent and landlord relations, next slide. We're highlighting 2 really major issues. The first is that previously agreed to rents are no longer affordable. And the federal and many provincial governments have been trying to support business sustainability by SECRA and the new Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy Program that was announced last week. In addition, some provinces have put temporary moratoriums on evictions. The second issue predates the pandemic, but it has been made more urgent by it. We found in some research we did last year that many small businesses enter into leases without fully understanding the terms of commercial leases, or also hiring lawyers to help them. They don't realize that they have very limited protection outside of the terms of the lease. And so we suggest that government step in by offering business support programs that stress the importance of understanding leases and provide education to help them to help them understand what they're getting into, so to speak, and what they can ask for and what they can't. Also, to reduce the barriers of seeking professional support, we suggest that governments facilitate access to legal assistance and subsidize the cost of that. And again, there's more detailed strategies provided in the solution brief itself. So next slide. However, despite best efforts, we expect that Main Street vacancy will increase. Strategies that business associations can use were discussed at yesterday's webinar, very interesting discussion, which I know is still available online on the Big Black Main Street site. Governments can facilitate by ensuring that the policy context is supportive. For example, by reviewing how vacant floor space is treated by tax policy and whether adjustments can be made to incentivize landlords to permit nonprofit or startups to use the space instead of keeping it vacant. And John has a few examples of some of these other strategies.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some good stories over the last 6, 7, 8 months in terms of some innovation and different things happening in terms of, stopping the bleed, but also kind of forward thinking in terms of forward opportunities for main streets. We've seen, there was an article about a theater group taking over, I think, 7 vacant storefronts on a main street and doing sort of an interactive theater presence where people are on the street and can watch the theater move forward. Definitely how a lot of main streets have invested and businesses invested in a lot of pop-up, and those resources are great now that we see a lot more pop-ups coming. And then on the recruitment side, or even kind of the retention side, there was a great article a couple months ago here in Toronto. There was a butcher and a fresh fruits and vegetable marketplace, and they were both kind of not doing great sales and stuff, and so they were able to form together and cooperate in terms of leasing one space together and having both of the operators operate together out of that one space. So that kind of thinking, that kind of coming together really saved 2 businesses, which otherwise they might have just kind of failed and gone to the wayside. So that kind of cooperative, enabling type kind of ideas are really important going forward.
Great. We should also explore, however, more creative and call it unconventional approaches to land and property management to help sustain strong small businesses on main streets and reduce vacancy. There are a few examples in the solution brief and action report. I really liked one in the action report, one called More Than a Pub program in the UK, which sounded very intriguing. Also, we shouldn't forget the governments themselves are major property owners. We can support Main Street recovery by locating community facilities in main streets and designing them in a way that animates the street. Next slide, John. So in terms of property tax affordability, it is a major fixed cost for businesses. Many municipalities have responded by deferring payment due dates and waiving penalties and interest charges. But here in the fall, we're finding that regions of the country the pandemic is still significant and business activity is still limited. So continued consideration may be necessary in those regions, notwithstanding the revenue crunch that local governments are experiencing by now. A pre-existing issue that was greatly exacerbated by the pandemic is the impact of current value assessment in areas where property values are volatile. Businesses may be faced with sudden and unexpected increases in property tax that are related to the changing market value of the property they occupy, not to the profitability of their particular businesses. We should anticipate the impact that COVID-19 may have on the 2020 and 2021 assessments and the consequent impact on property tax levels for Main Street businesses. And where affordability is likely to be a problem, and I expect there'll be a really wide variation across the country, a combination of provincial and local government action may be needed to mitigate the impact. More details provided in the solution brief, my recurrent theme. In terms of access to financing, next slide, John. Government loan and grant programs have greatly assisted businesses bridge the gap between reduced revenues and fixed costs. Many local governments have assisted in helping businesses figure out their eligibility for the different programs and navigate the application process. Ongoing support will be needed in the view of the resurgence of the pandemic in some regions, and it was great to see last week's announcements to that effect. Conventional financial institutions have been reluctant to lend the small business sector, seeing them as high risk, and this is even more so since the pandemic. Government loan guarantee programs have helped, but we may need to look at how to facilitate more community-based financial models. Van City, for example, is an example of a community-based credit union that's doing some really important work. Philanthropic foundations are another route. For example, there is a Black Opportunity Fund that was started in June of this year with the support of the Toronto Foundation. But more avenues like that, I think, are needed in Canada. Next slides, John. So last but not least is the regulatory framework. The first issue, small businesses are small, and I think that's something we often forget in government. They don't have the staff resources to keep up to date and navigate the fast-changing spectrum of COVID-related regulations and support programs. John's got a couple of examples of that.
Yeah, in terms of when we're always looking for new businesses opportunities as well. And so in our previous research, we had looked at businesses with less than 5 employees and saw that they were decreasing, and the way businesses come forward, it has changed a lot. And so definitely you have areas where there's high percentage of newcomers, and that's the way forward for businesses, and just trying to find their way forward is difficult, and their access to financing is difficult. So the communication and understanding how these small businesses, especially newcomers, operate is vitally important to our main streets, and making sure that they're not left falling through the cracks in terms of our programs and the government programs that are coming up with.
Perfect. And then a second major issue is that being safe brings with it some new requirements and costs for already cash-strapped businesses. Governments can help by facilitating access to suppliers and supplies and providing financial support. An interesting nuance is the impact on increasing garbage volumes. All of the disposable masks and so forth, and we can no longer use reusable containers. All of that is increasing garbage volumes. Governments may want to consider providing some relief by temporarily reducing waste collection fees, as well as reducing fees for some other small business permits and licenses to help out in the short term while businesses are coping with all of this. So in terms of key messages, our overriding key message is that a successful policy response needs to consider that business is a partner. So how we do that is not just having a public meeting or something like that. We really need to listen to businesses. We need to discuss the issues they're having and brainstorm possible solutions before we frame policies. We need to, once a policy is finalized, we need to communicate it both broadly and deeply to ensure that the individual businesses know about it and understand how it impacts them. Strengthening business networks such as BIAs, SDCs, chambers of commerce, etc., help policymakers connect with the individuals, and is so deeply important. The municipalities that have concentrated on helping support strong business improvement areas and bids and so forth have really, they've been invaluable through this pandemic, and more of that work is really important to do. We need to remember to pay extra attention to business startups and businesses that are owned by equity-seeking groups. We often just look at the total take-up of programs. We should ensure that we're also reaching the businesses with special needs, let's call it. We should ensure that we involve them in our discussions and outreach, and we should monitor their participation in program. And we should remember to offer one-to-one assistance and support whenever possible to help businesses understand the regulations and interpret them to their own individual situations. So thank you. In terms of last slide, that was definitely a whirlwind overview of the solution brief, and we look forward to the panel's discussion and reaction to that. So over to you, Andre.
Okay, that is awesome. Thank you, Judy and John, for a lightning presentation. I know that was tough because there was so much in there, but you gave us the high-level Coles notes and enough to dig into for sure. So with that, I will ask our other panelists to turn on their cameras and unmute their mics. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
And so what we're going to do now is offer each of you 3 to 5 minutes to offer your sort of rapid fire reflections on the 360 presentation, but also to share your perspectives on small business friendly policies for Main Streets in general. And I think, you know, what you're seeing in your communities as well. And then from there, we'll open things up to questions and discussion amongst us. And I'll try and bring in questions from the chat as well. So maybe to kick things off, we can go from east to west. So Antoinette, can I ask you to start things off?
Yeah, sure. So I think really the key of the presentation that was made with the presentation that we just had is that collaboration for us was really the key point of the success that we encountered this summer in Montreal. Because yes, the situation was not easy, and it's still not easy because we're still confined and everything. But I really think that collaboration with the City of Montreal and with the SDC and l'Association des SDC in Montréal really made it easier for businesses. From one part is that the city was really, really helpful with making everything easier for businesses, whether it was to get like permits for the public domain occupation for terraces during summer, or even to make some streets pedestrian for the summer. So this was really helpful just to bring people outside and to get people into the streets, where consumers maybe were afraid, or maybe they didn't want to go out, or maybe like everything was so uncertain. So it was really to bring people out there and to help businesses to make it better for consumers to be there, like beautification and pedestrian streets, and bike lanes were added to get people from point A to point B. So the city was like Montrealers really took the city for themselves over this summer, which was really good. So this was a part of from the city. Also, they deferred the payments of taxes. That was really good for businesses, for the cash flow. So, and everything with the subsidies was really helpful just to get businesses afloat for the summer. And now I would say that the part of the SDC de Montréal, so the BIDs, was really to get the information to the businesses, because it's always the same thing, you know, like programs are there. Sometimes they're not well understood from businesses. So the goal is to get these programs to the businesses. So that's where the SDC in Montréal took place this summer. So I think the goal that we had was to communicate clearly what was offered to the businesses to help them over this summer. There was also really helpful from the city that every streets that were pedestrian this summer was kind of studied. So they hired an independent firm just to get studies on the streets. Was the pedestrian streets good for businesses? Was it appreciated from people that were walking there? So it was really helpful just to have a clear understanding of whether it was good or bad to have pedestrian streets. So, and it was good. So we're happy about this. And now, from now on, I think really communication will still be the key, and we will have like our what we have to face over the next months is winter. So that's where maybe it's gonna hurt. But I think from the experience that we had over this summer with people in the streets, I think we want to recreate like happenings in the public domain for the winter. So let's see how it will go. But I think the city has helped us a lot.
Okay, that's terrific. So collaboration and communication as the key, I think, to tease out the key points.
Yep.
Why don't we move down the Fleuve Saint Laurent to Chris, who I'm not sure where exactly you're based. I know that the MPAC head office is in Pickering?
I'm in Toronto. It's okay.
Oh, you're in Toronto. Okay.
Toronto resident for sure. Thanks for the opportunity, and definitely Antoinette, on the collaboration side, I think what we really saw in this crisis was everyone come together in the community and in the public and private sectors to really develop and implement solutions. As mentioned, I work with the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation here in Ontario, but was seconded back to the City of Toronto for the last 6 months to lead the city's economic response to COVID. And of course, a lot of that was focused on Main Street and small businesses right out of the gate back in March and April. You know, the city with its 83 BIAs, a real recognition of, you know, what really makes our communities tick, and in the backbone of our neighborhoods are our main streets, and that, you know, that what makes city life so great is really that quality of life that we get from our main streets. It's the restaurants, it's the arts, it's the culture, it's the interactions with your neighbors. And I think there was we all felt right away that, wow, we could come out of this and that could be lost. And so a lot of our initial focus was on how do we retain and support Main Street. It's a key ingredient to the quality of life of why we enjoy our lives in the city. And that's a key selling point of what we do to try to attract investment to the city. And so if we lose that, we're in big trouble. And so, you know, some of the things that we rolled out right away, similar to our colleagues across the country, was, you know, right off the bat, that one-on-one support. We set up a call center in like 10 days to provide that one-on-one support for small businesses across the city. You know, rejigged all our resources within economic development and helped people fill out their funding applications. And that evolved over time, of course, as we started reopening, then educating one-on-one on what they had to do to reopen their restaurant. And that's infrastructure that ultimately will stay in place now to support entrepreneurs, you know, through the rest of the pandemic, but of course, hopefully beyond as well. We also really focused on a digitization of Main Street businesses. When I previously was with the City of Toronto, we developed a program called Digital Main Street, which was really focused on helping Main Street businesses embrace technology and transform their operations that way. And of course, that program has now grown across Canada, but started as back in 2016 with my team here in the city. And, you know, so we were already kind of ahead. We had that infrastructure and we ramped that infrastructure up as well. So again, we set up a call center that was focused on helping businesses, you know, get selling online right away, and grew some new programs out of that. One of the programs I think that really highlighted the collaboration side was a program we launched called Shop Here, which is now again available across Canada. But we developed it in Toronto initially. It took us about a week, but, you know, we had Google, we had Shopify, and we had you know, a few of our universities around the table. We said, this is what we want to do. We want to just like help people. We're going to build online stores for Main Street businesses for free and help them launch them. And we want to build 3,000 stores by the end of August. And, you know, we put the call out to the tech community. Google and Shopify came in and wrote big checks to make it happen. We put a call out to the tech community to say, we need volunteer web developers. We had over 1,000 web developers volunteer to build websites. We hired a few hundred students through Schulich, and they were then helping businesses onboard those websites. And everybody just did it right away. Like, you know, I sent a text message to my contact at Shopify and I said, I need some money to do this. And via text got back within a few minutes that we're in. And it was this great sense of purpose that we all had to support Main Street and that sense of collaboration. And, you know, that was pretty amazing to see. And it was great to see as we kind of came through and started reopening, and we launched things like Cafe TO to open up the streets for cafes, and we closed streets for people to get out and get active. And, you know, these are things that typically, you know, any other time it would be we need a bunch of studies, and we'd have big crazy debates at council, and it was just like, yes, do it. And it was it was great to just see those things happening, and it totally transformed the city this summer. We may be paying for a little bit now with the second wave, but ultimately, I think these are innovations and things that happened around making things happen in our communities and our main streets that ultimately should outlive the pandemic, and showed us what is possible in our communities. And I think, as we start to look forward, a lot of the great stuff that you've highlighted in your report is how we're going to need to be much more activist on rebuilding Main Street coming out of the pandemic, and really understanding that, yes, we need to make sure we have civic investments, and we want to encourage more people living in our cores and along our main streets. But we're going to have to take a much more community economic development mindset to rebuilding Main Street. So really understanding what are the gaps, doing that market research, building those business models so it's easy to open up a green grocer or whatever those types of gaps might be, and then working actively to recruit entrepreneurs in that neighborhood to fill those gaps, and then providing them, grants to get up and started. And and I think that's going to be a big change, especially in a place like Toronto, which hasn't really been active, in that community economic development space. But that'll be a big shift that's going to be required to really rebuild our main streets, and really rethink about how we bring that vitality back, and ensure at the same time that we're rebuilding back better, and we're building in resilience. Because I think what we all saw was Main Street, we all knew Main Street was suffering, but we saw, like, you shut off revenue for a week or two, it's gone. And so we really need to rethink that resilience and really build those local connections between people and their main streets in their neighborhoods, so that they support them, and that they realize that they're supporting their neighbors when they're supporting their main streets. So, I think the report has really laid out the importance of what we need to do from a response perspective, but ultimately, what's the foundation of how we rebuild, and how do we rebuild and build that resilience back into Main Street longer term? So great work.
Okay. That's awesome. Thanks.
Sorry,
thanks,
I talked
Chris.
too much.
I love, no, that's great. Firstly, I think much to be applauded in terms of a bunch of those innovations that you guys spun up quickly. And I think I love that idea of the activist approach to the rebuild and some of those ideas. I also love the idea of sending someone a text message and them sending me money back. So maybe you can teach us about that.
I just want to be first off clear that I didn't get money back via text message. I just got an agreement, and the city invoiced and all that kind of stuff. Just want to be clear on that. You
should sell the story. No,
proposal via text
everything
message.
was above board. I'm sure. Okay, let's turn to Judy Lamb to give us her perspective and talk a little bit about how things have been going in Hamilton.
Thank you. And I agree with the report, and I agree with what the panelists have said. So I think what the pandemic has done is we knew that small business would be the hardest hit sector. So reducing costs for them, teaching them or allowing them to try to increase their revenue, but providing the information, because everything was changing so fast. So what we found early on was how do we help them maintain some of their revenue when all the businesses were shut down and everyone was staying at home. So we introduced Hometown Hub and created that website so that even if a business didn't have a website, they could sign on right away, get their business listed, and allow for gift cards to be sold online. And that was a way where we could support them. The other part was working with our chambers of commerce to get the information out. So developing a business continuity COVID site so that the latest information, all the programs that were being released was in one spot that they could help out. In terms of our city also deferred property taxes and waived interest for a while. And that helps them retain some of the costs. One of the big things we also did was the outdoor dining districts, similar to Toronto. Usually, as you said, the collaboration that was needed among different levels of government was absolute. And really, I've never seen governments work so fast, really, when you're talking about local, provincial, federal. And as example, outdoor dining districts, we got moving very quickly on that. the ECDEV reserve paid for all the fees so that we could waive all the costs to the businesses. And I would say, you know, with the provincial, with the Alcohol Gaming Commission, letting the cities decide meant that we could, you know, allow liquor to be served on patios. And among different departments, they worked together to approve applications in, on average, 48 hours, which, you know, usually that would take months and months. So we have over 160 that applied and was approved. And now, as of today, I think within an hour ago at council, we realized that we're entering the winter season and that businesses are still needing some assistance. So the bylaw has been extended till October 2021 to help keep that revenue going. So that was just approved today, I hope. It was going on while I was on this Zoom webinar. And, you know, the digital Main Street. So I think of this as retail has been already impacted from the last few years and the disruption to retail. And so helping those businesses survive in the thinking about the future means e-commerce has to be on their business plan. And so with the Hamilton Business Center, with working with Digital Main Street, with the shop here that, you know, Chris was talking about, and the new version. And so we've helped, I think only second to Toronto, with our 13 business improvement areas, work with all these businesses to try to get them up to, you know, what they need to do to survive the future. And whether that's, and we've relaxed our, you know, the commercial loading zones, because now people are ordering in, they need to pick up through Uber Eats, skip the dishes. So the ability, we waived parking fees downtown for a long time so that, you know, patrons could go downtown and buy food from the restaurants. And so, you know, there was a lot that I think the city did to try to think, what can we do to help the small businesses? In terms of Hamilton Business Center, they were operating during the whole pandemic. They've had to resort to one-on-one Zoom webinars, but we're still consulting with them, and waived fees for starting small business seminars. And so they, you know, we've been able to do that. And then with our talk about special needs groups, you know, that the immigrants and newcomers, you do recognize that they have more challenges than even the regular businesses, whether it's language or access to financing. So we have within economic development, the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, which we acronym is HIPSI, and their total task is to work with newcomers and help them adjust in their new country. And so I think what we're trying to do is work around all groups to end our facade grants. And actually right now we have a community improvement plan where we're now revising, and we'll introduce a new one by next spring. And we're going to keep in mind all the recommendations that came out of, that will be coming out in November from the Mayor's Task Force on Economic Recovery. And so we'll listen to the small business recommendations. It was a special group for small business, and listen to what they say they need. And the collaboration is key. We've been having weekly meetings where there are business improvement areas, because they are on top of what their businesses need. And we really value their input. So I'll just stop there. And I guess one big key that I think will help downtown is we have to make sure the residents are located in our downtown so they keep shopping and frequent our restaurants. And so part of our incentives has been encouraging the construction of all condos and apartments in this downtown area. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Judy. I would just say I had the pleasure of visiting one of the outdoor dining districts this summer, and it was terrific. I think also you mentioned that this special needs groups, which I think is, you know, in the local business community, which is important, something that that John and Judy highlighted in their report as well. Okay, so we will turn to Alex out in Vancouver. So a slightly different perspective on this. So curious to hear your take, Alex.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here and to be here with this really knowledgeable group of people. So I'm just going to echo what many of you have already said, that the COVID-19 pandemic has clarified that Main Street and small businesses are a fundamental part of our vibrant communities. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that throughout the pandemic, we've become a lot more local. So our neighborhoods and our streets and our neighbors are probably something that we're paying a lot more attention to. And so remembering that small businesses are a key element of our communities, not just because of the essential services that they provide, but also because the people who work there, the people who lead them, are our neighbors and our community members. And I think the conversation today is really fundamental in thinking about how we're managing COVID risks. So these are, physical risks, like making sure that there's physical distancing and opportunities for people to access business services in a safe way, but also mental health and the effect of unemployment and business shuttering and, having main streets that have businesses closing and what that does to our communities more broadly. So it's a really essential conversation. And I applaud picking up on experiences across Canada, because learning from what is happening in different jurisdictions is a kind of policy transfer or idea generation that I think can have really meaningful impacts on what happens next. So in my work, I talk a lot about pop-ups, how are pop-ups created? How are they managed by cities? But I think we're talking here about a really unique kind of pop-up, which is the pandemic pop-up. And what's happening is we're seeing a different kind of decision-making. So many of the folks who've already commented have talked about how cities have changed how they've been working, maybe relaxing some rules, getting new and in some ways really necessary changes to the regulatory frameworks, changes that BIAs and other small businesses have been asking for a really long time. And so some of these changes won't just stay through the pandemic period, but are going to be long lasting, because we're seeing how much better decisions can be made when they're faster and more nimble and more responsive to needs that are on the ground. And that's really important. But I think just one thing to add to this idea of pandemic pop-ups is that we can't lose sight of inclusivity. And so part of that inclusivity is business inclusivity. So Judy, for example, highlighted newcomers operating small businesses and how, we really can't lose sight of those particular needs. But there's a wide range of businesses in our cities that aren't always captured by BIAs. For example, in Toronto, we have, I thought it was 82, but I guess 83 BIAs that exist. But there's lots of other businesses that exist in equally dense areas that don't have BIAs who are able to represent those interests. And so we really have to pay attention to, not just the storefronts, not just the, hipster BIAs that are in, Queen West, but also the local businesses that are operating in Rexdale and other communities that are just as important as the ones that are in our local neighborhoods that we care about. At the same time, there's another kind of inclusivity that I think is important to interject, which is the fact that we need community inclusivity. So we have a wide range of vulnerable and racialized community members in our cities, and in thinking about business transformation and aid to businesses, not losing sight of the fact that these changes can have effect on, policing or whether or not we think that people are customers or what have you, and what effects that might have on those folks. So I just want to talk super briefly about the kinds of changes that I've seen in terms of pop-ups in Vancouver, and then some ideas just to put on the table for the next wave of our discussion. So in Vancouver, we see pandemic pop-ups that are geared to individual small businesses. So these are things like helping with aid for businesses to make sure that they can access funding, property taxes, etc. But there's also a series of initiatives that are aimed at main streets more generally, mostly in terms of infrastructure. So relaxing rules around patios, shifting spaces to widening pedestrian zones and bike lanes, and enabling, kind of more policy-oriented decision-making, like drinking in parks, and kind of widening space that then businesses can jump in and operate within those public spaces. And then there's changes that are more community focused, which might not seem like they're small business targeted, but actually do enable small businesses to come to the table. And these are the hubs, right? Like on the main streets having, or just off of the main streets, having sets of tables set up where people can congregate outside in a safe way with heat lamps, etc. Or in the downtown east side, having spaces that are set up to provide community services, but also allow for much needed business services to reach those communities. So there's a wide range of ways that cities can intervene. And that's the first part, I guess, of what I want to leave you with, is this idea that cities really need to be the leaders. They need to be the, in my view, the place that is enabling nimble decision-making. And so really a plea for cities not to curb their responsibility in serving as leaders in addressing the needs of small businesses in the broadest sense. The second is that in thinking about what needs to be done, of course, there's really important short-term issues, but also thinking about recovery in the long run. So, we need to think of heat lamps, we need to think of the winter, but also the spring and the summer and what's going to be coming next, and seeing our community businesses as essential community members that will need help in the long run. The third is partnership. So we've heard about the tech industry and how they can be helpful. I think thinking outside the box in terms of partnerships that are possible is really important, including community partners in First Nations who have a lot of experience navigating bureaucracy and needing to deal with tons of regulation, and universities. So how can university legal clinics help small businesses during this time? And then finally, really just coming back to what I said at the very beginning, which is that we're talking about place-based needs. And so each community is going to have its own set of needs. And so not to have a one-size-fits-all approach, but really be thinking about, and really talking to the businesses that are, and the community members that are within localized areas.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Alex. So that is a great list. I also love that it's forward-looking. One of the challenges of running these webinars with such a great panel and with a robust report is that you very quickly run out of time. So we have about 10 minutes left, just less than 10 minutes left. So Alex, you highlighted 4 forward-looking things. Cities need to be leaders. We need to be thinking about the short-term and long-term recovery. We need to be thinking about partnerships and the kind of unique place-based aspect of it for various cities and communities across the country. What I was going to do is turn to each of the panelists and to John and Judy for kind of a lightning round. What is the one thing that needs to happen as we look forward in terms of supporting small businesses on main streets? And it can be either the very immediate in the short term or something over the longer horizon. And I would, before that, I would just apologize to the folks in the chat. I've been scanning everything, a bunch of great comments. Panelists, while you have a second, some of them are directed to you, so you can jump in and answer questions there as well. But so why don't we go back to Antoinette's in Montreal to kick it off. 1 to 2 minutes.
Again, I'm always a lucky one, the first one to go. I would say for the months to come and for the years to come, what we need for small retailers or small stores, it's really to provide them with great tools to build their own resilience. Because there are a lot of great stores there, whether it's, as Alex was saying, like stores that are really like the cool ones or the hip ones. And there are also stores that doesn't look that cool, but at the same time, they have a really important role in community. And I think it's really to provide tools to give them resilience to thrive over time. And I think the city has been already doing a great job with, let's say, putting up some pilot projects for, let's say, local deliveries that are made on bikes, so that local stores could actually deliver very fast, like within 2 or 3 hours, let's say a book or whatever that they had to sell. So it was really if you cannot go to the store would come to you. So this was really, really helpful for local stores. And it's only one example of the resilience that they can actually build for themselves. But I think this one was a really good one. And also it's pushing them to go online. So everything, but sometimes like a presence online can be really, really small. It's really for your own set of customers that are really local but it's only if customers won't come to you, you will have to go to them. So it's really, I think what we will have to push. And it's also, like, let's be honest, we're facing a lot of concurrence. So like from Amazon and right. So it's really, really hard for even small stores, because at the moment people are just turning online. And even if at the beginning we were really turning into local stores, now we're facing Amazon. So we have to give them really the resilience to maximize their operations.
Okay, that's perfect. So tools to build resilience, including around e-commerce. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I think just building on that, the technology for small businesses that, typically, we've heard, don't try to compete with Amazon, but I think, we're at a point now where technology is so low cost and so easy to work with that Main Street businesses can embrace technology and can compete. And ultimately, whether we're in a pandemic or not, it's about removing that friction between you and your customers. So the idea that, like, I live on St. Clair and Dufferin, so I've got a great Main Street, but I want to buy down the street, but I like to go onto their website first, see if it's there, and then I can walk over there and pick it up, right? And the technology is there, and it's low cost, and it's accessible. And we've seen that through launching Shop Here, is that, you took people who had like very low, digital literacy, and they were launching e-commerce stores. And once they started playing with it, they realized how easy it was. That these are smart people, but they just need a little bit of coaching. And they're like, oh, okay, well, this is actually pretty easy to do. And then I think bigger picture beyond that digital transformation work that, Digital Main Street and Shop Here have been kind of so integral around. Is, Alexandra's point around leadership of cities, like going back to the city for 6 months, while it was the scariest time as a public servant, it was also like the most exciting time, because we were just doing whatever. We were launching programs in a week. We'd have a crazy idea. It's like, let's do it. And we'd roll it out. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. We're just like, oh, let's change it. Let's do this. And so, nobody really knows where this is going, right? We're still very unsure what the future looks like. And so, policymakers and public servants are going to have to just try things. And if you're scared to try things, you're going to be paralyzed and things are going to fall apart. So we got to be rapidly prototyping, trying new things. If it doesn't work, cool, throw it out. But just keep trying to build on those ideas. And cities are best place to do that. So, to my public servants and to local politicians is, let your great staff go run free and develop cool and interesting solutions, and get behind them and support them. And especially when they fail, support them and recognize that everything doesn't always work out, but we need to try new things in this new world that we really don't know where it's going.
Okay. I love that. Inspiring. Judy L.
Yes.
One quick thing, 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay. So I think we're going to keep trying new things, just like what Chris said. We're thinking how we help them survive long term, and that is digital. And that's also coming up with ideas how they can fill. So I don't have boarded up storefronts in our downtown. We're going to do everything we can. I'm going to think up of new facade grants within our CIP. We have some ideas. And so I think best is keep liaison with all our small businesses, and our Hampton Business Center is key in giving them the tools to succeed.
Okay, excellent. And last word to you, John and Judy.
I guess building on what Chris and Judy were both saying, but what everyone was saying is, I hope we remember the lessons we've learned and don't go back to grinding bureaucracy. I think I just can't believe the difference that this has made to the way government responds to things, where they become enablers, not thinking of 1,000 reasons why not to do things. We've just been doing it. It's great. And I hope that continues, and that we remember how important main streets are to the quality of life in our communities, and that the businesses in them need our support.
And I'll just add, agree with all that. And then just being a future opportunity orientated, keeping that hopper full of new ideas to occupy our main streets. That location on our main streets still matters. And how does that kind of happen in terms of that? This is, I see in my own neighborhood, new businesses still opening up during the pandemic, which is great that they're, finding that way forward. And through the chat, I mean, I think the kind of recurring theme is still with access to financing, and how that new businesses can access that financing, and whether it's being delivered not at the bank level, but maybe more of the credit unions and different cooperatives and different kind of things that have to come forward and be legitimized for access to financing, rather than the traditional set that we're used to in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to leave on. It's something that you guys explored, but that I think definitely needs some further focus in the next little while. So I will close it there. Mary will slap my wrist for sure for being a minute over, but I think that was a great session. A big thanks to you, John and Judy, for all of your work on this project, but also for presenting your report today. Big thanks to all of the panelists for all your excellent thoughts on this, and of course to the audience for joining us. And I'm sorry I didn't get to more of your chat stuff, your chat comments and questions, but I hope you took something from this. So a reminder, this is the second of 4 Action Week events focused on Main Streets. Tomorrow's will focus on rapid placemaking with Vancouver-based Happy City, and then Fridays on planning and urban design for pandemic recovery with Halifax-based Fathom Studios. So we're hopping all around the country. Those should both be really good. So we encourage everybody to join us for those. And with that, I will sign off. Thanks again, everybody, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.